accompanying the withdrawal agreement establishes the framework and basis for an ambitious, broad and deep partnership. This unprecedented partnership, which should take the form of an association agreement, shall fully respect the integrity of a single market and the autonomy of our legal order. We also welcome all the interpretative declarations adopted by the Council and consider them legally binding, including with regard to Gibraltar. On the future relationships, the UK has made its red line clear throughout the process, just as we have, and we respect this. In the negotiations, we have shown a high degree of flexibility, and we have stretched the deal as much as we could in order to take into account the position and the constraints of the United Kingdom. We have always said, and we repeat it also now, that if the UK changes its mind, our arms are and will remain open. But as far as you want to leave the single market and no longer apply the principle of free movement of persons, this is the only possible way to orderly leaving the European Union, avoiding the severe disruption of a no-deal scenario. There is no other deal that could respect such limits without compromising or endangering our European project. This Parliament is a very symbol of our common project, of links between countries and people. This is why we will continue to play a responsible, a proactive role in safeguarding the integrity of the Union and ensuring a positive future relationship with the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Gualtieri. Mr. Van Orden.
A lot of experts on domestic British policy these days. Look, Brexit was always about much more than the economy. In a way, because the European Union strayed so far into many other areas, into our national lives, it is why the British people voted for Brexit. They were increasingly unhappy with this tendency. You say you didn't want Brexit, but you did nothing to avoid it. But of course, the economic aspects are central. A bad deal for Britain or no deal will have repercussions in many European countries as well as Britain. Much time seems to be spent here on predicting events in London and the consequences of Brexit for Britain. Perhaps we should look at the impact of a bad deal or a sour relationship on the European Union. Certainly the British government entered into negotiations in a spirit of goodwill, aiming for a positive future partnership. There's been astonishment in Britain over the legalistic inflexibility that has been shown quite often. But we all know that the EU will bend or break any of its own rules when it suits it. And instead of defending the long-term interests of EU countries, it seems to have chosen to pursue a narrow ideological course, defending a particular view of the EU project, which is increasingly repudiated by citizens across Europe. And it may appeal to the leaders of a couple of the larger countries in the European Union. Instead of listening to citizens, your answer to everything is just more Europe. And by the way, I think a lot of people have been very cross in Britain about the discourteous way in which our Prime Minister seems often to have been treated. Because of your insistence on a bizarre sequencing arrangement, you've wasted 2 years when you could already have made progress on a free trade agreement. All other issues would then have fallen into place. It wasn't necessary to do it in the way you did. This makes it all the more important to move quickly into negotiating our future relationship and reaching rapid but correct conclusions. But we need some reassurance and flexibility, indeed guarantees from the EU over concerns that have been expressed. We need an atmosphere of trust and goodwill from your side if we are to have that future positive, stable relationship that is surely the least that all our citizens demand. Thank you.
Michel Lambert.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, at the EU Council last Sunday, many asked me if I felt sad. Actually, rather than sadness, I felt gratefulness first to Michel Barnier and his outstanding team. Not only did they negotiate the agreement keeping in mind the common interest of the EU without ever losing their nerves, they did so, and that is one of Michel Barnier's defining qualities, involving the Council and Parliament on an equal footing, keeping the EU team together in more than one way. Of course, this agreement is not perfect. As far as we Green CFA are concerned, we would have liked to see something more than non-regression clauses on social and environmental matters as a condition for the UK staying in the customs union. And the political declaration should again have been more explicit about conditioning our future relationship on the UK not becoming a tax haven or a money laundering country. Count on us to be tough on these issues as we move forward. I also felt relieved that after 18 months of very hard work, an agreement could be found. Had that not been the case, the worst-case scenario of the UK crashing out of the European Union would have become the likeliest, causing major damage not just to business, but above all to people. Relief that the EU could reach this agreement with the UK without compromising on its integrity. Relief that the British government had finally come to terms with reality. The ball is now clearly in the UK's court. The Prime Minister has come to terms with reality, but it remains to be seen whether she will find a majority supporting the deal in the House of Commons. To the dissatisfied Brexiteers, I will say this. If a negotiated Brexit is what you want, and unless you would also consider keeping the country inside the single market, no other deal is available. Whoever negotiates on behalf of the UK will face the same legal constraints as Theresa May did. And I hope no one of you is seriously considering leaving without an agreement. Because if the UK did that, it would be in breach of the Good Friday Agreement, because at once a border would be re-erected in Ireland. It would also be in breach of its financial commitments taken under the EU treaties during its membership period, because leaving a club, my friends, does not free you of paying your outstanding debt. In other terms, crush Brexit would make the UK a rogue state, a country whose signature with any other partner would amount to just nothing. The real choice, therefore, is only between Brexit under the terms negotiated and no Brexit at all. That choice will have such an impact on the future of the country that as a Democrat I would find it normal that we would ask the people, especially as the major parties seem to be very divided on the issue. I will agree with Remainers that your country finds itself in a less enviable position now than it was as a member state, because indeed the European Union is a boost to sovereignty. In this world, if we want to have impact, we need to act together. And I think many British citizens realise that. Are there a majority? We don't know. Can we find a way to ask them? If there is one, it is very narrow. But I'm certain though, that if the UK would want to renounce its intention to leave, we should embrace it back with pleasure. Equally, and that is my final word, Mrs. President, I think it would be utterly irresponsible to end up with the UK crashing out of the European Union, either voluntarily or inadvertently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel Lambert. Madam Zimmer.
In its meeting last weekend, the Council approved the divorce agreement between the EU and the UA. However, no one can say at the moment whether that will lead to an orderly Brexit. It is time to prepare for the worst-case scenario, a no-deal situation. Our work in the political group, the Brexit steering group, and the work on the resolutions of the Parliament from April 2017 was not something that was going to be easy from the outset. The decision to be involved in the work of the Brexit steering group was right. And in relation to that, I'd like to say that the cooperation with Michel Barnier has set standards for the future cooperation between institutions in the European Union. We also have to say very clearly that the withdrawal agreement is no cause for celebration. The requirements that we wanted to see respected for Northern Ireland and for individual rights are perhaps not as complete as we would have liked. We cannot make up for shortfalls in the withdrawal agreement with agreements about the future arrangements. The withdrawal agreement also contains the backstop, which is an emergency solution. That has been agreed in order to avoid a terrible outcome in Ireland. At the same time, it doesn't meet what was promised in the joint report at the end of last year. The border dividing Ireland will become harder, and border crossing arrangements will be more difficult. Good Friday, rights guaranteed in the Good Friday Agreement will be minimalised. Certainly, we've seen efforts from Theresa May to promote the withdrawal agreement, and it is being put forward as a way of stopping queue jumping from the EU to the UK. And a number of colleagues in the government and in Parliament here have not fully understood the essence of European citizenship and the rights that bestows. They forget that it gives their own citizens rights, which are now being taken away. There is a suspicion that EU citizens could be discriminated against after the process of Brexit. After the separation of Great Britain and the United Kingdom and the European Union, we have heard that there will be great efforts on both sides to have a very close partnership, but that will require a lot of work. I agree with Guy Verhofstadt that we need to protect the interests of citizens not only in Great Britain but also the European Union. We certainly also want to protect the interests of citizens of Great Britain and the United Kingdom in living in the European Union. So that is an issue alongside the issue of Northern Ireland, which we'll continue working for. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Zimmer. Mr. Farage.
I'm in no doubt that this withdrawal agreement is a good deal. It's a good deal because it involves large transfers of money. It's a good deal because it maintains free movement of people. It's a good deal because it keeps Britain in the customs union and stuck with the EU's rulebook. And crucially, the key point, as Mr Barnier said this morning, there is the backstop, which means, of course, the United Kingdom can be held effectively as a hostage for many years to come. It's a good deal for the European Union. For the UK, I think it's probably the worst deal in history. Something, Mr Brok, that President Trump has noticed. And, by the way, he is a great respecter of the great nation states of Europe, and certainly no enemy of any single one of them. No, Mr Barnier, I have to say, I wish you were on our side, really, because it's game, set and match to you. You probably can't even believe your luck that you came up against the British Prime Minister, who met every single demand of yours whilst at the same time trying to deceive the British public, and you took it to the big summit on Sunday, and in 38 minutes it was all agreed, done and dusted, and off to lunch. Well, I have to say, we will be leaving on March the 29th next year, but any illusion at home that we're going to be an independent country, I'm afraid, has been shattered. And you know, before the ink was even dry last Sunday, President Macron of France stood up and decided to start to threaten us. Now, I understand the French do catch 90% of the haddock in the west of the English Channel and we get 10. I understand their interests, but I fear that we're very much now open and at your mercy over the course of the next few years. And the truth of it is, the political declaration, in that, you haven't got to give us anything. You don't need to give us a thing. And that is why this is going to fail in Parliament, and probably fail by a very big margin. Now, Mr Barnier, you say this is the only possible deal, but this deal isn't going to be accepted. So perhaps we all need to grow up and recognise that there is a strong chance now of the UK leaving on March the 29th with a WTO no deal. We need a negotiated deal to deal with sensible border issues. I wonder, Mr Barnier, are you prepared for that? Because you seem this morning to assume that the British Parliament is going to ratify this. It isn't.
Monsieur Le Breton.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. The British people decided 2 years ago to leave the European Union. Their sovereign decision must be respected. For the Europe of nations and freedom which I represent here today, respect for the wishes of such a nation is paramount. It's shocking that the European Court of Justice has received a case which will decide upon on the 4th of December, questioning this deal. And it could not be the case elsewhere. In France, the relevant court has refused to carry out such controls after the event on a referendum. We need to resist any such initiative. Sovereignty is not something that's confined to treaties or to what judges decide. It's a meta-legal power allowing each people to decide freely on their destiny. So long live the British people. Long live Brexit.
Mr Carver.
Last week Angela Merkel said, and I quote, "What's been important to us is that the UK cannot decide unilaterally when the customs union ends, but rather has to define that time frame jointly with the EU. The European institutions took control in 1973 and ironically continue that control through this 2018 Brexit betrayal deal. This deal means that we remain a nation of supplicants. We've lost the freedom teasingly dangled before us through the 2016 referendum results, when the British establishment and political class were rudely reminded that the British people want to take back their sovereign control. Ataturk's wise words now seem more appropriate than ever when he said, "Sovereignty is not given, it is taken." This is a terrible deal. Bad because the EU continues to hold my country over a barrel, and the British politicians who sign up to it need to understand that history will be their judge, and believe you me, it will judge them all very badly. Madam President, a number of friendly pro-European colleagues within this Parliament have openly admitted to me that they cannot believe their luck in how bad a deal this is for the UK, and it surely cannot be allowed to proceed on such a one-sided basis. Thank you.
I now give the floor for the last word to our chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you to all distinguished members who have spoken, in particular Guy Verhofstadt and Elmar Brok, Roberto Gualtieri, Philip